Rachel worked tirelessly alongside him, pouring through the mountains of evidence they had gathered. Every recording, every email, every document they had uncovered was carefully reviewed and organized. Rachel's confidence was unshakable. "We have enough to take him down," she assured Marcus one evening as they worked late into the night. "We just need to make the right move." That right move came in the form of an unexpected ally. The anonymous caller who had helped them earlier reached out again, this time offering something invaluable: a signed affidavit detailing Caldwell's criminal activities, including the bribery of public officials, the manipulation of the media, and even a falsification of evidence against Marcus. It was a bombshell, and Marcus knew it could turn the tide. With Rachel's help, Marcus crafted a plan to release everything at once. They couldn't risk a slow rollout of information, knowing Caldwell's team would move quickly to counteract any leaks. Instead, they prepared a detailed report, complete with evidence and witness statements, and handed it over to an investigative journalist who had a reputation for exposing corruption. Marcus also recorded a video statement, addressing the public directly. In the video, Marcus spoke from the heart. He didn't focus on his wealth or power, but on his role as a father and a man seeking justice. "This fight isn't just about me or my family," he said. "It's about standing up to those who think they can abuse their power without consequences. It's about ensuring that no one else has to endure what my daughter and so many others have suffered." The video was released alongside the report, and the impact was immediate. The journalist's expose went viral, painting a damning picture of Caldwell and his network of corruption. News outlets that had once vilified Marcus began to shift their tone as the truth came to light. Public opinion started to turn in his favor, and the pressure on Caldwell intensified. Caldwell, however, didn't go down without a fight. He issued a statement denying all allegations, claiming he was the victim of a smear campaign orchestrated by Marcus. But the evidence against him was overwhelming, and as more whistleblowers came forward, Caldwell's carefully constructed facade began to crumble. The final blow came when federal authorities announced an investigation into Caldwell and his associates. Fisher, who had been taken into custody during the convoy interception, agreed to cooperate in exchange for a reduced sentence. His testimony provided crucial details about the illegal experiments and the clinic's role in Caldwell's larger operations. For Marcus, the victory was bittersweet. The ordeal had taken a toll on him and Naomi, but as he watched the news coverage of Caldwell being escorted out his office in handcuffs, he felt a sense of closure. Justice had been served, and the weight he had carried for so long began to lift. In the weeks that followed, Marcus focused on rebuilding his life and protecting his daughter's sense of normalcy. He kept her close, spending time together in ways they hadn't been able to during the chaos. Naomi, resilient as ever, began to find her smile again. She asked questions about what had happened, and Marcus answered them honestly but gently, ensuring she understood that she had done nothing wrong and that her courage had inspired him to fight harder. Rachel stayed on as Marcus' advisor, but their relationship had grown beyond a professional one. She had become a trusted friend, someone Marcus knew he could rely on no matter what. Together, they worked to establish a foundation dedicated to protecting vulnerable patients and holding medical professionals accountable. The foundation's mission was clear: to ensure that no family would have to endure what they had faced. As the media frenzy subsided, Marcus found solace in the quiet moments. One evening, as he sat on the porch with Naomi watching the sunset, she leaned her head against his shoulder. "Dad," she said softly, "are we safe now?" Marcus wrapped his arm around her and nodded. "Yes, sweetheart," he said. "We're safe, and I promise I'll always protect you." The battle with Caldwell had tested Marcus in ways he never imagined, but it had also shown him the depth of his own resilience and the power of standing up for what was right. As he looked out at the horizon, he felt a renewed sense of purpose. The fight for justice was far from over, but for the first time in a long time, Marcus felt at peace, knowing he had done everything he could to protect his family and make the world a little better. Amaya hesitated, biting her lip, as she stared down at her sketchpad. Marcus waited patiently, giving her the space she needed. Finally, she spoke, her voice trembling. He grabbed my arm really hard, she said, showing him the faint red marks that were beginning to form. And he yelled at me because I said I didn't want the shot yet. I was scared, Daddy. He scared me. Marcus's jaw tightened, but he kept his voice calm. Thank you for telling me, he said, his heart breaking at the thought of his little girl being treated that way. You didn't do anything wrong, okay? None of this is your fault. Amaya nodded, her eyes welling up again. Marcus reached over and gently pulled her into a hug, holding her close as he silently vowed to make things right. Back at home, Marcus's team of assistants and advisors was already on standby. He had called ahead, giving them a brief but urgent directive: gather information, anything and everything about the doctor, the clinic, and the protocols in place. By the time Marcus walked into his study, his top assistant, Rachel, was ready with a file of preliminary findings. Marcus, Rachel began, her tone serious, we've already uncovered some red flags about this doctor. His name is Dr. Edward Fisher. He's had complaints filed against him before, nothing that's gone public, but enough to raise concerns. It looks like those complaints were quietly swept under the rug. Marcus's eyes narrowed as he scanned the documents. Swept under the rug by who? He asked, his voice cold and measured. Rachel hesitated. The clinic, mostly. They've got a powerful legal team, and it seems like they've been protecting him. But there's more. Dr. Fisher has ties to some pretty influential figures in the medical community. It's possible that's how he's managed to stay under the radar. Marcus leaned back in his chair, his mind working overtime. He didn't care how influential this man or his connections were. What mattered was ensuring that Amaya, and other children like her, was safe from people like him. Rachel, he said after a moment, his tone decisive, I want a full investigation. Dig deeper into those complaints. Find out who else has been affected and why nothing's been done. And reach out to our legal team. I want to know exactly what steps we can take. Rachel nodded, already jotting down notes. I'll get on it right away, she said. As the hours ticked by, Marcus found himself replaying the events at the clinic over and over in his mind. He couldn't shake the image of Amaya's scared face, her trembling hands clutching her sketch pad. It wasn't just about this one incident, it was about a system that allowed people like Dr. Fisher to operate without accountability. Meanwhile, Amaya sat in her room, trying to lose herself in her drawings. But her mind kept drifting back to the doctor's angry face, his harsh grip on her arm. She didn't understand why he had been so mean. All she knew was that she felt safe with her dad, and she trusted that he would fix things. The next day, Marcus received a call from Rachel. Marcus, we've got something, she said. One of the complaints against Dr. Fisher involved a young boy. His parents tried to take legal action, but they were silenced with a settlement. I've managed to get in touch with them, and they're willing to talk. Marcus's eyes lit with determination. Set up a meeting, he said. As Marcus prepared for the next steps, he couldn't help but feel a sense of purpose fueling his every move. This wasn't just about Amaya anymore. It was about standing up for those who couldn't stand up for themselves, about challenging a system that seemed to value power over accountability. But even as he pushed forward, Marcus knew this was only the beginning. The deeper he dug, the more resistance he would face. He wasn't afraid of a fight, though, not when it came to protecting his daughter and making things right. What Marcus didn't know yet was just how far-reaching this battle would become. Dr. Fisher wasn't just an isolated problem. He was part of a much larger web of corruption and negligence. And taking him down would require every ounce of Marcus's determination, resources, and strategy. As the day came to an end, Marcus sat beside Amaya as she drifted off to sleep, her small hand resting in his. He kissed her forehead gently, his heart heavy but resolute. I've got you, baby girl, he whispered. No one's ever going to hurt you again. Little did Marcus know, the storm he was about to unleash would ripple far beyond their family, challenging powerful institutions and exposing truths that had been hidden for far too long. The meeting with the parents of the young boy who had filed a complaint against Dr. Fisher was scheduled for the next evening. Marcus arrived at a quiet cafe with Rachel by his side, her notepad and laptop ready to document every detail. The couple, David and Elena, looked weary but determined. They were an average family, far removed from the wealth and influence Marcus wielded. Their son, Ethan, had been just 7 years old when they had their own encounter with Dr. Fisher. Marcus could see the pain in their eyes as they shook his hand and sat across from him. "Thank you for meeting with us," Marcus began, his voice steady but warm. "I know it's not easy to relive these things, but I need to understand what happened." Elena exchanged a glance with David before speaking. "It was about 2 years ago," she said, her voice soft but firm. "Ethan had a mild fever, so we brought him to the clinic. Dr. Fisher was the one assigned to us. At first, he seemed fine, maybe a little abrupt, but nothing alarming." David picked up where she left off, his jaw tightening as he spoke. But then Ethan got scared during the examination. He didn't want to sit still, and instead of calming him down, Fisher grabbed him roughly and started shouting at him. It wasn't just impatience, it was outright anger. Ethan started crying, and that made Fisher even angrier. He called him unruly and accused us of not teaching our son proper manners. Elena's hands trembled slightly as she continued. "We were in shock. We tried to intervene, but Fisher dismissed us, saying he knew what he was doing. It was humiliating and terrifying, especially for Ethan. We reported him to the clinic afterward, but all we got was an apology from the administration and a small settlement offer if we agreed to drop the matter." Marcus listened intently, his own anger simmering beneath the surface. "And you accepted the settlement?" he asked, though he already suspected the answer. David nodded reluctantly. "We didn't have a choice. They made it clear that if we pushed forward, we'd be up against their lawyers, and we couldn't afford that kind of fight. We thought it was better to take the money and move on, even though it didn't feel right." Marcus leaned forward, his voice firm but understanding. "I know how difficult that must have been, but you were brave to come forward, and now we have a chance to do something about it. If we work together, we can make sure Fisher doesn't hurt anyone else." David hesitated. "How? He's protected by the clinic, and whoever else is covering for him. We tried to fight, and we failed. What can we possibly do now?" Marcus's eyes burned with determination. "You're not alone this time. I have the resources to take this as far as it needs to go, but I'll need your help to build a case. If we can show a pattern of misconduct, they won't be able to sweep it under the rug anymore." Elena looked at her husband, then back at Marcus. "We'll do whatever we can," she said quietly, "for Ethan, and for anyone else he might hurt." After the meeting, Marcus and Rachel returned to his office to strategize. The more they uncovered, the more it became clear that this wasn't just about Dr. Fisher. The clinic itself was complicit, covering up complaints and silencing families like David and Elena's to protect their reputation. It was a system built to shield those in power at the expense of the vulnerable. Meanwhile, back at the clinic, whispers of Marcus's inquiries had begun to circulate. Dr. Fisher, oblivious to the brewing storm, carried on as usual, his arrogance shielding him from any sense of accountability. But the clinic's administration was starting to feel the pressure. They knew who Marcus was, and they understood that he wasn't someone to be taken lightly. At home, Amaya was beginning to return to her usual cheerful self, though Marcus could see that the experience had left a mark. She spent more time drawing, her sketches a mix of whimsical scenes and darker, more introspective pieces. One night, as Marcus tucked her in, she held up her latest drawing, a picture of a small girl standing in front of a giant, faceless figure. "Is this you?" Marcus asked gently, sitting on the edge of her bed. Amaya nodded. "I was scared, Daddy, but I think she's not scared anymore." Marcus felt a lump in his throat as he looked at the picture. "That's because she's brave," he said, kissing her forehead, "and she knows she's not alone." As the days turned into weeks, Marcus's investigation gained momentum. Rachel had tracked down several other families who had similar stories about Dr. Fisher. Each one added another piece to the puzzle, painting a damning picture of a man who had been allowed to abuse his position for far too long. But with every step forward, the resistance grew stronger. The clinic's legal team began sending subtle threats, warning Marcus to back off. Anonymous emails arrived, hinting at potential scandals that could damage his reputation if he continued. It was clear that the fight was escalating and the stakes were getting higher. Marcus, however, was undeterred. He had faced challenges before, and he knew that the closer he got to the truth, the harder his opponents would push back. But this wasn't just about winning, it was about justice, about standing up for Amaya and every other child who had been hurt. One evening, as Marcus reviewed the latest findings with Rachel, she hesitated before speaking. "There's something you should know," she said, her tone cautious. "We've uncovered evidence that Fisher has connections to one of the clinic's major donors, a man with significant influence in both the medical field and the local government. If we go after Fisher, we'll likely be going up against him too." Marcus leaned back in his chair, his expression unreadable. "Good," he said after a moment. "The higher the stakes, the greater the impact when we win." Rachel nodded, a small smile of admiration crossing her face. "I had a feeling you'd say that." As the night wore on, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. The deeper he dug, the more corruption he uncovered, and the more determined he became to see it through to the end. For Amaya, for Ethan, and for every family who had been silenced, he would keep fighting, no matter how powerful his opponents were. But even as he planned his next move, Marcus couldn't help but wonder, just how far would the clinic and its allies go to protect their secrets? And was he prepared for the full weight of what he was about to uncover? The investigation into Dr. Fisher had taken on a life of its own. What started as a personal mission for Marcus to protect his daughter had grown into something much larger, a fight against a deeply entrenched system that seemed determined to bury the truth. The deeper Marcus and his team dug, the more tangled the web of corruption became. Rachel's latest findings revealed just how interconnected the players were. Dr. Fisher wasn't just a rogue doctor with a history of mistreatment. He was a linchpin in a larger network of negligence and cover-ups. The clinic, its board of directors, and even some of its high-profile donors had been complicit in allowing unethical practices to go unchecked. And at the heart of it all was one name: Victor Caldwell, a wealthy philanthropist who was the clinic's largest benefactor. Victor was a name that carried weight, not just in the medical community but across the city. His donations had funded state-of-the-art facilities, medical research, and community outreach programs. To the public, he was a hero. But behind the scenes, he wielded his influence like a weapon, protecting his allies and silencing dissent. Marcus realized that taking down Dr. Fisher would inevitably mean going up against Victor and all the power he commanded. Marcus's legal team had been working tirelessly to build a case, gathering testimonies, documents, and records that painted a damning picture of the clinic's operations. But every step forward was met with new obstacles. Key witnesses suddenly went silent, likely intimidated by the clinic's legal threats. Files that Rachel had been promised from whistleblowers mysteriously disappeared. And then there were the veiled warnings that came directly to Marcus, a reminder that his own reputation and empire could be at risk if he continued pushing. But Marcus refused to back down. The harder they fought to stop him, the more determined he became. He knew the risks, but he also knew what was at stake. This wasn't just about exposing a corrupt doctor or a broken system. It was about standing up for the powerless, about making sure no one else had to endure what his daughter or Ethan had faced. The tension reached a boiling point one afternoon when Marcus received an unmarked package at his office. Inside was a thick envelope filled with photographs, emails, and other incriminating documents. Not about Dr. Fisher or the clinic, but about Marcus himself. The message was clear. If he didn't back off, these files would be leaked, potentially damaging his public image and business empire. Marcus stared at the documents, his mind racing. There was nothing outright illegal in them, but they painted a skewed narrative that could be easily manipulated. He knew how these games were played, how a story could be twisted to turn public opinion against someone in an instant. Rachel entered the office, her expression tense. "I heard about the package," she said, setting her laptop on the desk. "They're getting desperate. That's a good sign." Marcus smirked, though there was no humor in it. "Desperate, maybe, but they're not bluffing. They're willing to play dirty." Rachel crossed her arms, her voice firm. "So what? Are you going to let them scare you off? You've already come too far to back down now." Marcus met her gaze, the fire in his eyes unshaken. "Backing down was never an option," he said, "but we need to be smarter." The next move was a calculated risk. Marcus decided to go public with part of the story, releasing carefully curated evidence to trusted journalists who had a history of exposing corruption. He knew that once the story broke, the clinic and its allies would be on the defensive, scrambling to control the narrative. The media response was immediate and explosive. Headlines about Dr. Fisher's misconduct and the clinic's alleged cover-ups dominated the news cycle. Families who had previously been too scared to speak out began coming forward, their stories adding fuel to the fire. The pressure on the clinic was mounting, and even Victor Caldwell's carefully constructed public image was starting to crack. But the fight was far from over. As Marcus and his team prepared for the next steps, they received an anonymous tip about a meeting happening at the clinic's headquarters, a closed-door session involving Victor Caldwell, the clinic's top executives, and Dr. Fisher himself. The source claimed that the meeting was intended to strategize damage control and discuss how to neutralize the growing scandal. Marcus knew this was an opportunity he couldn't pass up. If they could gather evidence of the clinic's active efforts to cover up the scandal, it would be a game-changer. But it wouldn't be easy. The clinic's headquarters were heavily secured, and any attempt to infiltrate the meeting could backfire if they were caught. Rachel, ever the strategist, suggested a bold plan. "We have contacts who can help us get access to the building," she said. "It's risky, but if we pull it off, we'll have undeniable proof of their guilt." Marcus considered the plan, weighing the risks against the potential rewards. He knew the stakes were higher than ever. If they succeeded, it could be the turning point in their fight for justice. But if they failed, it could all come crashing down. The night of the meeting, Marcus found himself pacing his office, his mind racing with anticipation and uncertainty. Rachel and a small team of trusted allies were on the ground, ready to execute the plan. Marcus had chosen to stay back, knowing his presence would draw too much attention, but the wait was agonizing. Hours passed with no updates, each minute stretching into an eternity. Finally, his phone buzzed with a message from Rachel. "We got it, asterisk." Marcus exhaled, the weight of the tension momentarily lifting. But even as he felt a flicker of relief, he knew the battle was far from over. Whatever Rachel and the team had uncovered, it would only serve as the next step in a fight that was rapidly reaching its breaking point. As Marcus stared out the window of his office, the city lights twinkling in the distance, he felt a renewed sense of purpose. The stakes had never been higher, and the opposition had never been stronger. But he wasn't fighting this battle alone, and he wasn't about to give up. What Marcus didn't realize was just how explosive the revelations from the meeting would be. The truth they uncovered would shake the foundations of everything the clinic and its allies had worked to protect, and it would force Marcus to confront the ultimate question: how far was he willing to go to see justice served? Rachel returned to Marcus' office late that night, her face pale but resolute. She carried a small flash drive, gripping it tightly as if it held the weight of the world. Marcus, who had been pacing by the window, turned the moment she walked in. "What did you find?" he asked, his voice steady but tinged with urgency. Rachel sank into the chair across from him and plugged the drive into her laptop. "You're not going to believe this," she said, pulling up a series of audio files and documents. "It's worse than we thought." The first file was a recording from the meeting. Victor Caldwell's voice was unmistakable, calm, calculated, and chilling in its confidence. In the recording, he laid out a plan to spin the narrative, shifting blame away from Dr. Fisher and portraying the families as opportunists looking for a payout. But that wasn't the most shocking part. "There's something else," Rachel said, clicking to another file. It was an email chain, heavily encrypted, but now decrypted thanks to a contact of hers. The messages revealed that Victor and the clinic's leadership had been covering up not just Fisher's actions, but a much larger scandal involving falsified patient records and illegal experimental treatments conducted on unsuspecting patients. The implications were staggering. Marcus stared at the screen, his mind racing. "This isn't just about Fisher anymore," he said, his voice low. "This is a systemic operation. They've been using the clinic as a front for something much bigger." Rachel nodded, "And they've been careful. They know how to cover their tracks, but this recording and these emails are enough to crack the surface. If we go public with this, it won't just expose Fisher. It'll take down the entire operation." For a moment, the weight of what they'd uncovered hung in the air. This was bigger than Marcus had ever imagined, and the stakes had never been higher. But before they could celebrate their breakthrough, Rachel's phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen, her face tightening as she read the message. "What is it?" Marcus asked. Rachel hesitated. "It's from one of our sources inside the clinic," she said. "They're saying Caldwell knows we have the recording. He's already taking steps to discredit us. And there's something else." Marcus leaned forward, his eyes locked on hers. "What?" Rachel took a deep breath. "They're planning to move Fisher out of the city. Caldwell's worried he's become too much of a liability, and he doesn't want him around when everything hits the fan. If Fisher disappears, we lose a key piece of the puzzle." Marcus clenched his fists, the tension building in his chest. They were so close to exposing the truth, but now the clock was ticking. If Fisher was allowed to vanish, it would make their case infinitely harder to prove. "We can't let that happen," Marcus said firmly. "We need to act now. If we wait, they'll bury this so deep no one will ever find it again." Rachel nodded, already typing furiously on her laptop. "I'll reach out to our contacts and see if we can intercept whatever plans they have for Fisher. But we'll need to be careful. Caldwell isn't just going to sit back and let this happen. He's got the resources to fight back, and he's not afraid to use them." As the night wore on, Marcus and Rachel worked tirelessly to finalize their next move. They knew they were walking a tightrope, and one wrong step could bring everything crashing down. But they also knew they couldn't stop now, not when they were so close to the truth. The next day, Marcus received an unexpected call from an unknown number. He hesitated for a moment before answering. "Mr. Bishop," a deep voice said on the other end, "I believe we have a mutual interest in bringing Caldwell to justice." Marcus frowned, his mind racing. "Who is this?" The voice chuckled. "Let's just say I used to work for Caldwell. I know things that could help you, if you're willing to listen." Marcus glanced at Rachel, who was watching him intently. "I'm listening," he said cautiously. The voice continued, outlining details about Caldwell's operations that even Marcus hadn't uncovered. It was clear the caller had been close to Caldwell at one point, but his motives were unclear. "Why are you telling me this?" Marcus asked. "Because Caldwell betrayed me," the caller said, his voice hardening. "And because I believe in justice, even if it's coming from an unlikely place. But be warned, he's more dangerous than you realize. If you want to take him down, you'll need to move quickly, and you'll need my help." Marcus ended the call with more questions than answers, but one thing was clear. The stakes had just been raised. With Caldwell aware of their actions and Fisher on the verge of disappearing, the fight was escalating faster than anyone had anticipated. As Marcus prepared for the next phase of their plan, he couldn't shake the feeling that they were heading into uncharted territory. The pieces were moving, the tension was mounting, and the lines between ally and enemy were becoming increasingly blurred. But one thing was certain, the battle wasn't over yet, and Marcus was determined to see it through, no matter what it took. As the pieces of the plan came together, the pressure felt unbearable. Marcus, Rachel, and their small team of allies worked around the clock, knowing they had only a narrow window to act. The anonymous caller had provided critical details about Caldwell's next move. Fisher was being transported to a private airstrip under the cover of night, and once he was gone, the trail would grow cold. Marcus knew they had one chance to intercept him and ensure he faced accountability. The night of the operation was tense. Marcus insisted on being there, despite Rachel's objections. "You've done enough behind the scenes," she argued. "Let us handle this part." But Marcus wouldn't hear it. He had promised himself, and Naomi, that he wouldn't rest until justice was served. He wasn't about to break that promise now. Rachel's contacts had secured a tip about the route Caldwell's people would take to transport Fisher. The plan was simple in theory: intercept the convoy, retrieve Fisher, and secure him before he could disappear. But everyone knew the risks. Caldwell had a reputation for being ruthless, and his people wouldn't go down without a fight. The convoy arrived at the location just as predicted, a sleek, unmarked black van surrounded by two SUVs. Marcus watched from a distance, his heart pounding as Rachel gave the signal. A sudden surge of lights and noise surrounded the vehicles as Rachel's team moved in. For a moment, chaos erupted: shouts, the sound of tires screeching, and the heavy thud of footsteps on gravel. Marcus held his breath as he approached the scene, staying just far enough back to avoid being spotted. Rachel's team had blocked the van, and Fisher was being pulled from the back, his face pale and panicked. But as Marcus moved closer, something felt off. Fisher was barely resisting, and the guards seemed strangely calm, almost as if they had expected this. Then it hit him. This wasn't an extraction, it was a setup. Rachel's voice crackled over the radio. "Marcus, something's wrong." The driver just handed over a phone. "It's ringing. It's Caldwell." Marcus's blood ran cold. Caldwell had played them. Before he could react, his phone buzzed in his pocket. The number was unknown, but Marcus knew who it was. He answered, his voice low and steady. "Caldwell." Well, Marcus Bishop," Caldwell said, his tone infuriatingly casual. "I have to admit, you've been quite the thorn in my side. But I did warn you, didn't I? This game of yours, digging into things you don't understand, it was never going to end well for you." Marcus's grip tightened on the phone. "Your days of hiding behind money and power are over. We've got everything we need to expose you." Caldwell laughed, a cold, mirthless sound. "Do you? You think you've won because you intercepted Fisher? He's nothing but a pawn, Marcus. And while you've been so focused on him, I've been preparing my own move. You should check your daughter's school." Marcus's heart stopped. "What did you just say?" "Relax," Caldwell said, his voice dripping with mock sincerity. "She's perfectly safe, for now. But it would be a shame if something were to happen because her father didn't know when to back off." The line went dead, and Marcus stood frozen for a moment, the weight of Caldwell's words crashing over him. He turned to Rachel, who had been listening through the shared comms. Her face mirrored his fear. "We need to go," Marcus said, his voice trembling with urgency. "Now." The drive to Naomi's school was a blur. Every second felt like an eternity as Marcus's mind raced with worst-case scenarios. He had thought he was prepared for anything Caldwell might throw at him, but the thought of Naomi being dragged into this battle was unbearable. When they arrived, the school was quiet, its windows dark. Marcus and Rachel rushed inside, their footsteps echoing through the empty halls. Relief washed over Marcus when they found Naomi in the library, unharmed and unaware of the danger. She looked up, startled, as Marcus swept her into a tight embrace. "Dad, what's going on?" she asked, her voice small and confused. "It's nothing, sweetheart," Marcus said, his voice shaking with both fear and relief. "I'm just glad you're okay." As they left the school, Rachel's phone buzzed with an alert. She pulled it out, her expression shifting from relief to alarm. "Marcus," she said, holding out the screen, "look at this." It was a live news report. The headline read, "Breaking. Billionaire Marcus Bishop, accused of bribery and fraud. Marcus stared at the screen, his stomach sinking. Caldwell had made his move, and it was a devastating one. He had used the documents from the mysterious package to spin a story implicating Marcus in a web of corruption. The media frenzy was immediate, with reporters already camped outside Marcus's office and home. "This isn't over," Marcus said, his voice steady despite the storm swirling around him. "He thinks he can intimidate me into backing down, but he's underestimated what I'm willing to do for my family and for justice." Rachel nodded, her determination mirroring his. "Then we fight harder than ever." As Marcus held Naomi close, he realized that this battle had become more personal than he ever imagined. The stakes were higher, the risks greater, and the cost unimaginable. But as the storm raged on, one thing was clear. Marcus Bishop wasn't backing down. Not now, not ever. The next few days were a whirlwind for Marcus. The accusations against him spread like wildfire, dominating news outlets and social media. Reporters camped outside his home, shouting questions at him whenever he stepped out. Naomi was kept home from school, shielded from the chaos by her father and a team of trusted security personnel. But inside the storm, Marcus refused to lose his focus. He knew this was Caldwell's attempt to break him, to make him retreat, and Marcus was determined to prove that he wouldn't bend. It was supposed to be a routine visit to the clinic. Amaya, a bright and curious 9-year-old girl, had been feeling a little under the weather, and her father, Marcus, had taken time out of his busy schedule to make sure she was checked out by a professional. Marcus wasn't just any father. He was a billionaire entrepreneur, known for his sharp mind and fierce loyalty to his daughter. Despite his wealth and influence, he always valued the small, everyday moments he shared with Amaya. This visit was supposed to be one of those simple father-daughter routines. The waiting room was filled with the usual chatter of other families, the hum of muted conversations blending with the occasional cough or the rustling of magazines. Amaya, dressed in her favorite yellow hoodie and clutching her well-loved sketchpad, sat beside Marcus, doodling quietly as they waited. Her wide smile could brighten any room, but today it was slightly dimmed by her unease. Marcus noticed, gently ruffling her curls. "We'll be out of here in no time, kiddo," he reassured her. When their names were called, they entered the small examination room, its sterile walls lined with medical equipment. The doctor, a middle-aged man with a stiff demeanor and a brisk tone, barely glanced at them as he stepped inside. His curt introduction felt cold, but Marcus brushed it off, more concerned with getting Amaya the care she needed. But as the minutes ticked by, something felt off. The doctor's attitude wasn't just dismissive, it was unsettling. His gaze lingered on Amaya in a way that made Marcus's protective instincts flare. His tone grew sharper, his words unnecessarily harsh. Amaya, usually confident and outspoken, shrank in her seat, her hands clutching her sketchpad tightly. Then it happened, a moment so shocking, so unjust, that it would change everything. The doctor's actions left Marcus stunned, his pulse racing as he fought to process what he'd just witnessed. Amaya's soft whimper broke his heart. For a split second, the room was filled with a heavy silence, the kind that comes before a storm. Marcus knew he couldn't let this go. He couldn't let anyone, no matter their position or power, treat his daughter this way. Little did the doctor know, he wasn't dealing with just any father. He was dealing with a man who had built empires from the ground up, a man who had faced adversity and come out stronger every time. And now Marcus was going to make sure that no one would ever dare to harm his daughter again. 2 minutes later, the wheels of justice and retribution were set in motion. What followed was a chain of events that would expose not only the doctor's actions, but also the deep flaws in the system that allowed such behavior to go unchecked. Stay tuned, because this is a story of resilience, justice, and the unbreakable bond between a father and his daughter, a story you won't want to miss. Let me know if this works or needs adjustments. Marcus stood frozen for a moment, his mind reeling as he replayed what had just happened. Amaya's small frame seemed even smaller as she sat on the examination table, her wide eyes glistening with unshed tears. Marcus clenched his fists at his sides, the protective father in him screaming to take immediate action. But he forced himself to breathe, to think. This wasn't just about reacting. It was about making sure this never happened to Amaya or anyone else again. The doctor had already stepped back, his posture stiff and unapologetic. He muttered something under his breath, a half-hearted excuse wrapped in arrogance, but Marcus wasn't listening anymore. His focus was entirely on his daughter. He crouched down to her eye level, his tone soft despite the storm brewing inside him. "Are you okay, sweetie?" Marcus asked gently, brushing a tear from her cheek. Amaya nodded quickly, but her trembling hands gave her away. I'm okay, Daddy," she whispered, though her voice was barely audible. Marcus felt his chest tighten. He had spent his entire life building an empire, overcoming obstacles that would have crushed most people, all to ensure that Amaya had a life filled with love and security. Yet here she was, vulnerable and hurt in a place that was supposed to protect her. He helped her down from the examination table, his hand steadying her as she grabbed her sketchpad. "We're leaving," he said firmly, his voice low but commanding. He glanced back at the doctor, who stood watching with a mix of annoyance and indifference. As they walked out of the room, Marcus's mind was racing. He wasn't just angry, he was calculating. He didn't become a billionaire by reacting impulsively. He became one by understanding his opponents, by being 10 steps ahead. And now, that same mindset was kicking into high gear. In the car, Marcus turned to Amaya, his tone softening. "I'm so proud of you, baby. You're so brave," he said. "But I need you to tell me everything. What happened in